the panel right now.
Right. Here we go. Is it better? Can you see the slides? Oh,
Yep.
no. Okay. So, all right, great. We're gonna go ahead and start, and thank you all for being here today. So let's go back. So this is a new international webinar series titled New Leisure Studies, International Perspectives. It was started last year, so maybe not as new as some of you are aware. So this webinar is organized by a group of 7 leisure organizations from across the world, including, here we go, including Australian and New Zealand Association for Leisure Studies, Canadian Association for Leisure Studies, China International Leisure Research Association, Leisure Studies Association, Sociology of Leisure, the Academy of Leisure Sciences, and World Leisure Organizations. And we really appreciate collaboration of all organizations in preparing this webinar. This is the first webinar this academic year, but there were several webinars that we delivered last year as well. And we invite you to join for upcoming webinars. The next webinar will be focused on work-leisure balance and will take place in the beginning of December. We're also planning a couple more webinars next year, so please join us for our new exciting discussions with experts from across the world. So the updated information about last year webinar or future webinars can be found on the link I will post in a chat in a few seconds, and also will be sent and circulated through the listservs of each 7 organizations. My name is Irina Sharyevska, and I'm representing Clemson University and the Academy of Leisure Sciences. And I would like to introduce our host today, Dr. Ingrid Schneider, who is a professor at the Department of Forest Resources at the University of Minnesota. Thank you, Ingrid, so much for leading us through this discussion today. I would also like to thank the TALS Global Relevance Committee for assistance in preparation of this webinar, and a couple of announcements for our participants today. I just want to make sure that everybody understands we're recording this conversation, and this discussion will be sent to you as a recording after we are done. Please feel free to share it as wide as you wish. And then we also encourage questions and kind of discussion format, so please post all of your questions in a chat or Q&A section. And if there are any questions, discussions, anything like that, please do also let me know in a chat box. All right, I'll pass it on to Ingrid, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and all the work that you have done for this webinar in this series. I'm delighted to be able to host this webinar and the amazing people here who will share their information. Once again, we find ourselves at a time of technological revolution, what's been called the virtual century. And we thought it was time to take a temperature check and understand where we were with technology and its influence in the leisure, recreation, tourism, and sport world. So I'm very delighted to be able to host 3 stellar guests. I believe we're still waiting for one of them, but I will go ahead and introduce Kaylee, if you want to advance the slides. Yeah, to Gailey's slide, ideally. So she is a professor and chair at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where she's in the Department of Communications Studies. She's also a research fellow for the Center for Multidisciplinary Research in Aging and ABC Robotics in Israel. And she is representing the Academy of Leisure Sciences. She'll be bringing to this conversation her interest and emphasis on psychological and sociological aspects of leisure, media, and technology, with emphasis in older adults. A second panelist here with us today is Stefan Lawrence, who has a PhD in sociology with an emphasis on sport from Leeds Metropolitan University. Stefan is joining us from Birmingham, where he is a senior lecturer in sociocultural aspects of sport and leisure at Newman University. And his emphasis is on digital culture, racisms in sport and leisure, discourses of masculinities in popular culture, and football cultures. He's also founder of the Digital Football Network, which I really am interested to check out, and principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and a contracted expert evaluator for the European Commission. Third, based here in the United States, is Dr. Carrie Autry, who is an assistant professor in recreational therapy at the Department of Recreation Sciences at East Carolina University. She has a PhD in health and human performance from the University of Florida and is an active contributor to various journals in leisure, therapeutic, recreation, and sociology. She'll be bringing today her emphasis on youth development, therapeutic use of sailing and virtual reality sailing, adventure therapy, community development, homelessness, social capital, and therapeutic recreation and higher education to this technology-focused discussion. How we'll proceed today is we've got 2 to 3 questions for our panelists to answer. And we thought it would be advantageous first to start off and understand what is the role of technology in the leisure, sport, recreation, tourism experience in your country? How we'll proceed through this is each panelist has been given 5 to 7 minutes to share their thoughts about this, after which then we can perhaps take a few questions from the audience and then transition to a next question. So I will go ahead and we'll go in alphabetical order for this question, but look out, we might go reverse, Stefan, for the next. So I invite Carrie to share the role of technology in leisure, sport, tourism experience in the US.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate people attending this session today. So I'm looking at this question through a lens of working with those with disabilities through technology, specifically in recreational therapy, also known as therapeutic recreation. There are colleagues around the US that have been implementing programs and doing research in this area, including myself. A majority of what I'm seeing in the US is the use of virtual reality with a variety of disability populations and different settings. It's really gone way past the use of the we as an intervention. So virtual reality's really taking off in the healthcare professions, and we've definitely seen virtual reality as an intervention grow within our field and recreational therapy, particularly in the past 3 to 4 years. But my colleagues here at East Carolina University, Dr. Carmen Rusinella and Dr. Matt Fish, they've been using virtual reality in their biofeedback lab for the past 12 years with veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. So the outcomes of virtual reality and technology as an intervention for people with disabilities include rehabilitation, and that's physical and psychiatric or behavioral health, transition to real experiences, transference of skills, socialization, reminiscence, increase in activity, stress reduction, enjoyment, quality of life, and there's more. At ECU, I've had my sailing simulation lab, and I've been conducting research for the past 3 years, and it houses my virtual reality sailing simulator, which is behind me in my background. I'm not in my lab, but that's my simulator, and it is adapted at this point. So it has a screen, and then it's a real boat. It's got a joystick for steering, and it's got the seat inside of it. It is modeled after a real dinghy boat called an access dinghy. So within my lab and research, we address the physical, cognitive, social, emotional aspects of sailing through virtual reality for people with physical disabilities. Our variables include learning how to sail, balance, strength, quality of life, and our participants have recently been able to transfer their skills to an adaptive sailing program on the water, which we just did in September and October. And so it's virtual reality to reality. So that's been really exciting. But I wanted to tell you about some other colleagues in the United States that have been doing using virtual reality as an intervention in recreational therapy. And again, that's my lens, right? So at the University of Utah, Dr. Rhonda Nelson is really a well-known name in virtual reality and technology. They offer virtual reality trainings and CEUs for recreational therapists to be able to use that in practice. So it's very powerful a medium, what she's doing. Lauren Lee Isaacs is a PhD there. She has been really working in RT and virtual reality games and finding the best games for the therapeutic outcomes for people with disabilities. They also work on therapeutic use of robotic pets at the University of Utah for older adults. And that kind of ties in probably some of what Galit's doing. At Indiana University, Dr. Jennifer Pyatt, she's conducting research on socially assistive robots, also known as SARS. And they're also focusing on the training of that as well for the practitioners. And one of my colleagues here at ECU is from Indiana University, and she was part of that research too with the SARS. At Temple University, Dr. Gretchen Snethen and Dr. Gina Vargas, they've been using virtual reality in inpatient psychiatric settings and using virtual reality to help them transfer, to transition into the community. So that's really important aspect of using virtual reality for community reintegration. And then there's some other groups. Am I doing okay on time? I know I'm like chatty. Okay. There's another good number of others groups that are using virtual reality for seniors and older adults. Grand Valley State University with Dawn DeVries, Sienna Casper at the University of Lethbridge, the University of Nebraska College of Medicine. They're using virtual reality in hospice, which is very, very powerful. And then there's a company, Aged Care Virtual Reality, that really focuses on bringing in the literature and reporting some of the effects as virtual reality for seniors and older adults. And then there's other, I know there's other virtual reality programs and research going on outside of recreational therapy that maybe some other people can address. But
Thank you so much. What a comprehensive view of how it's being used and so exciting. Congratulations on your recent transfer. How wonderful for the people working with you and people beyond. That's terrific. And great to see where the hot spots are in the United States.
Yes.
Hey, let's hop across the pond and hear about the role of technology in leisure sport tourism. Stefan, please.
Thanks very much, Ingrid. Thanks very much for having me. I guess for context for the those that are logged in, I'm a sociologist and my interest is predominantly in the theoretical and conceptual aspects of leisure, football, sport, or soccer. And given we've got an international audience, so it's well beyond my skill set to talk about the applications in the therapeutic space, and that in many ways the research that Kerry's doing is really supersedes my kind of musings as a as a mere sort of philosopher, sociologist. Nonetheless, I think it's important really to point out that there are a number of similarities across the West, and there's research that's been conducted which points to the ubiquity of digital technologies that are serving the interests of informational capitalism. So I think that's fundamentally changed the way in which our leisure time is structured. Leisure time, we are now connected to our peers. Many of us are consuming what my forthcoming edited collection is calling digital guru media. It's a term that I am using to refer to a particular emergent form of digital media characterized by either a piece of tech, whether that be Google Home, Amazon Echo, or an embodied being, an online actor's delivery of content such as podcasts, blogs, websites, articles, photos, memes, that kind of stuff. In various ways purport to offer strategies and solutions, particularly to wellness, health and fitness demands, indicative of our late modern societies. So I think that we're seeing Apple Watches and the quantification of the self. Leisure time is no longer about simply being escapist or indeed being serious. It's also about the hashtag growth mindset and some of the questions surrounding those technologies in terms of the invasiveness of those technologies. Particularly, I think we're seeing more in the States of the alliedness of Apple Watches, Fitbits, etc., to insurance premiums, and the way in which work and leisure are being brought together into via statistical data to really surveil our leisure time, and how that then reduces premiums, which is something that is starting to be utilised in the UK. So I think that's particularly important of how the particular broader health agendas, the self-health management agendas of neoliberal societies are particularly being mirrored within our leisure time. I think that is a fundamental change and a fundamental shift in the way in which leisure is constructed and how it is utilised and how it is treated as a public good. So I mean, those technologies that we see are ubiquitous now have a number of different applications. They also have a number of different social consequences for leisure studies scholars. To ask more fundamental questions about the role of leisure in neoliberal society, and how whether it can be used as a resistive field, as a resistive activity, or whether it's one that merely kind of perpetuates the existing power structures that we have or that we see. And I think digital leisure studies is a field that we need to consider more in terms of where it's going. Is it simply producing knowledge that is used by our political elites to surveil its population? Are we bidding for monies to do research into health and wellness for the good of the body politic, or are we doing that simply for those in the United States that gain tenure, for instance, or those in the UK to seek promotion? So I think there's a moral and philosophical debate there to be had, which I'm not casting any judgment on at the moment. I'm just kind of because I'm not sure that I have the answers, but I think it's one that in leisure studies more broadly that we should seek to engage more about those technologies that seek to surveil and quantify our being.
Thank you so much, and I think that'll get us into a second question. But let's pause, and if Carrie, if you have any responses or questions for Stefan, or vice versa, we could address those. I got a couple of questions myself, and perhaps our audience does as well.
You can ask questions. You can go ahead and ask. but
Sure.
I just,
Yeah, we'll go ahead and go ahead.
just, I know I look through the lens of accessibility. So, but that goes beyond disabilities as well. So, and looking at the equity side of things that Stefan was taking as far as who has access to the technology. So,
Yeah, excellent question, equity. We do have a question in the chat. How might virtual technology be used with refugees? Individuals who've experienced trauma may have PTSD. Thinking of Afghani refugees in particular, could VR RT be of value with such life experiences to help them in resettlement?
Some of the work that Dawn DeVries is doing at Grand Valley State is with older adult population, but she was using virtual reality in the context of mindfulness interventions. So as far as some of the stress management side of things, I think it could be very therapeutic. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel too like I might have seen something along these lines out of Stanford. I'm not sure. They have a really significant program in empathy and emotion. In terms of homelessness, I actually just experienced their VR homelessness video. It's fantastic, really fantastic. Looks like we have a raised hand. We can go ahead, and I believe that, let me see our participants who are raising their hands. Mohammed, if you would like to share.
Hello.
Welcome, hello.
Yeah, okay. Good evening here from Pakistan. And my regards to all of you. Thank you very much for having me. Okay, I have 2-3 questions. I don't know how the session will go and progress, but okay, let me just. One is this inequality in access to the technology. I mean, specifically when I'm talking about, you already were talking about refugees, but what about the rural population, especially in the south of this area, global south, where we have limited internet access, we have limited access to the other technologies. Okay, this one is one thing. The other thing is, okay, this excessive use of technology, the other part of question is, okay, traditionally, what where I was just when my parents were raising me, or through our generation, I mean, we are in 30s and 40s. The excessive use of technology, this use of television, it was traditionally not thought as pleasure. It was traditionally thought as waste of time or something which will affect our health. I think same is still in the question mark whether the layer we have digitally it has more benefit or it's deteriorating our health in case of excessive use. So these are the two aspects I want to raise here, and hopefully I will get the answer and we will get it through. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. So as I understand it, there's the equity question, which is very real, where people without access to some technological advances, and then the excessive use. I know Carrie addressed this a little bit with the equity. Stefan, do you want to speak to this? Sounds like good in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, I mean, even in the UK, I can't speak necessarily to the situation in the global south, and Mohammed perhaps can do that. But I know even in the UK during the lockdown that we were experiencing here, that there was huge disparity in terms of the technologies that were available to school children. And we're starting to see some research now that is suggesting that those within the poorest or the most socially economically deprived areas in this country are now 6 to 12 months behind those children whose households had fibre broadband. I think that's the first thing to say, that I don't think it's necessarily a problem, unfortunately, that is exclusive to the global south. We're seeing that in the West as well. And not only that, but I think there's also a fundamental distinction which we don't make when we touch about digital poverty in the West, is that access to smartphones, access to fibre broadband in particular households is not and should not be equated with skill or mastery of those devices. There's an assumption that if we put fibre broadband into deprived areas, or that even if we were able to provide technology to those in digital poverty, that solves the problem. It absolutely doesn't, because the literacy which is needed to master those technologies and to be able to access the information that those technologies are able to open us up to is something that we also need to pay serious consideration to. Again, a number of papers which are addressing this particular issue. It's really not as simple as making these devices ubiquitous. There's also, of course, mastery that's needed of them to get the most out of them. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Sure, and it actually sets us up for our second question, which we need to get to. And I do see a question in the chat, which I will address after the second question, because it also works there. So the second question is COVID-19, as you were mentioning, accelerated trends toward more online experiences. So if and how do you think leisure, sport, tourism, recreation will transform because of this? Stefan, start us off.
I think it already has. I think what we've started to see, particularly within sports broadcasting, is an acceleration of streaming, and also some experiments in terms of how far that they can push the consumer in terms of the price point. There was an introduction, the Premier League in this particular country was attempting to charge for additional games, which caused a little bit of an uproar really amongst fans and spectators. I mean, that has fundamentally challenged some of the broadcasting models. I think we've started to see, actually, with the entry of Amazon Prime into the football broadcasting space, also a challenge to the traditional hegemony of the Sky B and a number of the main or the traditional sort of digital satellite services. And I think that's what's particularly interesting about football, if I may, or soccer, particularly in the UK, is to my mind, it is the most obvious, particularly in a UK context anyway. It is the battleground upon which digital or Silicon Valley and the tech companies and traditional mainstream media are waging a war for the global media hegemony. And I think that that's what we're seeing. I mean, we're seeing the shifting of broadcast models to ape of YouTube channels, of Facebook pages, shorter, sharper delivery of information. And we're also seeing, particularly in the UK, Sky fundamentally changing the way in which it offers sporting content to its audiences, in the sense that the traditional startup model of Sky was to have Sky Sports 1, Sky Sports 2, Sky Sports 3, which were multi-sports channels. We've now seen a shift, of course, to Sky Football, Sky Formula 1, Sky Golf, which is aping, as I say, the kind of behavior that customers are having online. So this fight for global media hegemony to offer what consumers and how they want to consume sport within their leisure time is also changing. So I think that's particularly important, really, for us to consider that these the changing delivery modes and broadcasting models don't necessarily speak to an empowerment for fans. I think that the Silicon Valley and the tech companies, as well as traditional media, are more interested in what each other are doing as to whether they're actively delivering a better leisure experience for consumers. So that's been particularly interesting. But I mean, the way that we're delivering sessions right now and the way that we have done has also fundamentally changed. I can't remember the last time I picked up a phone to a colleague to have any longer. It's the integration of Zoom into iCalendar, into Outlook, has streamlined the process much faster and much quicker. So we have seen some positive movements in terms of productivity, but fundamentally, whose interest perhaps is that serving our interests or the interests of our employers, which means that you can be perpetually more productive. So I think, again, those questions are important to ask.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Yes. Carrie.
I was just reading an article that said to deal with some of the stress of all this is to make sure to pick up the phone and talk to someone. But anyway.
Go out in nature is another option.
So I prepared my material for this question, and I have some negative facts about all this, and then some positive aspects. And some of them, the first part addresses Mohammed's question about excessive use and the negative aspects of that. And then the second part of my answer addresses some of the equity side of thing that there's some facts that are interesting. And again, I'm looking at this question through a lens of youth development. That's another side of what I do. So some things I found out with screen time in the US. So even though we thought the trend was that people were getting more outdoors, in the US, the screen time for ages 3 to 19 skyrocketed. So screen time outside of virtual school, this is outside of school, doubled for adolescents. So that's 13 to 19. So essentially they were spending almost a day's work of over 7 hours of screen time outside their schoolwork. They were spending an average time, or are spending an average time of 90 minutes just looking at videos a day. That's would be like a YouTube and TikTok. For children 8 to 12, the average screen time was 5 hours per day outside of their schoolwork, and 8 and under, almost 2.5 hours of screen time outside their school, 30 minutes per day. This is under 8 of watching videos. Another aspect of some facts relates to obesity, and the CDC just came out with a report for American children and teenagers. They've seen a significant increase in weight gain, with the biggest jump in the younger children and those already prone to obesity. So between ages 2 and 19, the increase went to 22% from 19%. That's 3% jump just within a 1 year period of time. So some things that happened that contributed to obesity with children at home and not having the resources for food security and access to nutritional food, that contributed to some of that. Disruptive sleep, decreased physical activity, but we know that that increase in screen time contributes to the weight gain. And so with all that said, it really takes me back like 13 years. In 2008, when we were and talking about in youth development was the nature deficit disorder presented by Richard Louv in his book, Last Child in the Woods. And so recently I saw a call that actually mentioned nature deficit disorder again, and the repercussions that having so much of that screen time inside was affecting children's health. Some positive aspects of technology are more relating to children with chronic health problems. So that's ADHD, autism spectrum disorder. So they were affected by the pandemic due to their interruption in routine, but there were some benefits. So being able to through technology actually reduce some of the stress that they had about going to school and the socialization aspects of that. So that actually helped them in some way. And another really important one, and this is the US, is that the technology and the telehealth aspect increased families' access to healthcare of those families that are in rural and poor areas. So it actually helped make it more affordable and accessible for their child's health care to use, to go through the telehealth. So that might be something for that third question of, the future of how important that is. And then a recreational therapist in Jewish Institute for Healthcare in Pennsylvania, she worked with virtual reality in the pediatrics hospital. So if you can imagine during the pandemic of all the social distancing and social isolation and how that can affect child development, they used technology, virtual reality, the robots, TV to help with the children enjoy recreational and socialization through those mediums. So I kind of look at some of this as, using technology as a means. And that's kind of what we do in recreational therapy because we're having it as an intervention. But there's also the experience in and of itself. So maybe the experiences in and of itself can address some of the accessibility side of leisure and making sure we're reaching more populations that have challenges to some of the aspects of leisure that we offer. Now, the good question that Mohammed brought up is, and Stephen talked about this too, is the access to the internet. How do we make sure that that's available to make that accessible? I have more information related to education. So what the benefits were to our academic side of things as far as internships and courses and curricula, but I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing such interesting and up-to-date statistics. Some of it perhaps not surprising, others, some good insight on opportunities. Stefan, do you have anything that you'd like to add or question related to what Carrie shared or vice versa? Oh.
Sorry, there we go. I knew I couldn't get through a Zoom session without talking while I'm on mute, right? So I think what's really important, and I know what the third question is going to be, so I've held back a little bit. I think it's an opportune moment here. I think one of the things that the lockdowns have done to us is to enforce through the acceleration of technology, space is compressed, time is compressed, and our physical environments have been compressed, which confines our leisure time and leisure space. And I think that's really a symptom. And I draw parallels really between Jean Baudrillard's work on Disneyland in terms of its purposes to suggest that all the America outside of Disneyland is, it veils the fact that all the America outside of Disneyland is unreal. I think the lockdowns have done something very similar. The lockdowns have veiled that our realities outside of lockdown are also not claustrophobic, and they are also not compressed, because they absolutely have been, and they absolutely are, to my mind. And I think that is something that we need to pay closer attention to, not necessarily to look at digital technology as a means to opening up our worlds to a cosmopolitan extravaganza of possibilities and multiculturalism, and because I think that privileges a particular viewpoint of academics and financiers and politicians and those that can see the transnational, but actually to look at it in the opposite way and to see what is closing in, and particularly the algorithmical foreclosure of the tech companies that are not only gathering data from us, but using that data to feed back our biases, to feed back our opinions, to enclose us within this digital echo chamber. And I think that with acceleration, there is a temptation to think that space opens up, when a really interesting way to think about it is that our leisure time is compressed, and not simply to stay within the lockdown mindset that now we have escaped lockdown, we are free again. I think what it would be useful conceptually, theoretically, and empirically to do is to consider the foreclosure, to consider that confinement of our leisure time, and how digital technology in fact forecloses as opposed to opens.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think your earlier response also gets to a question we had in the chat about live attendance and if that is a sustainable issue. There was a question about associated issues with eye health and screen time. Carrie or Stefan, if you happen to know that. Welcome, Dr. Nimrod. We will roll you into question 3. Great to see you.
Oh my God. Did I miscalculate the time?
All good, no worries. But Carrie, do you have any information on eye health and screen time?
I do not have
Okay,
information about the eye health. Mhm.
sure. Okay, interesting question. And then a question related to how can the developing world be pulled along with regard to the agenda of digitalizing leisure? Could they benefit from capacity building, especially given that the discipline of sport, recreation, physical activity isn't so popular? And this is from Kenya.
I don't mind taking that one. I think in significant investment into infrastructure is incredibly important, but what we're also seeing actually is the use of WhatsApp in the developing world, and how that is bringing communities together, which is something that is increasingly important. But that really depends on physical infrastructure as well, which is the big problem, of course. It requires a more fundamental internationalist agenda to take these things seriously, and that also fits into discussions of third world debt and third world poverty, which I don't think, unfortunately, we're in a position here today to impact on materially, apart from making those arguments in our work. And I think I'm guilty of it, and I think most of us sometimes are, that we really speak to the audiences in which our country, in which we're writing. But I think that particular kind of question and these particular kind of these events really hold me and others to account, to really consider the impact of our work beyond our silos and beyond the communities that we work within. And I think that's how fundamental change happens, when there is a groundswell of support. So I really thank whomever asked the question, because I think it's really important to hold us to account that we're not talking to a Western audience all the time, and some of those fundamental claims that we're making, how they affect those on a global scale.
Dr. Nimrod, do you have a perspective on the idea of accessibility in developing countries with building capacity there for technology?
I'm sorry. First of all, I want to apologize. I guess I did a huge mistake in calculating the time. I was sure that I'm 20 minutes early. Maybe it's the time change that I didn't take into consideration, probably. So I really, really apologize. I prepared so many things to talk about and present. So I guess I'm late to the party. Ingrid, are we talking about question number 3, the one about the future, the opportunities?
Well, I was going to give you a chance to address the question in the chat about developing capacity, but we can transition to that if you'd like, whichever.
Okay, so I'm really sorry. I'm like blushing here. You can't see it, but I am. Anyway, thinking about the future and thinking about parties. Okay. I think that we have 2 huge opportunities, and the first one I think worth like a separate panel, and that's about research methodologies. Okay, because new technologies definitely offer us exciting opportunities for data collection. Some of them are traditional methods that were just transferred to the online sphere, such as surveys and observations, focus groups, in-depth interviews, and so forth. But there are also innovative methods such as network analysis or data mining that we should definitely look into and utilize in our studies. I will not get into that because I think I have a greater message to the people here and to our field probably. And that it has to do with being late to the party, okay? Like the internet, as we know it, was established around 1996. It has long history, but the World Wide Web became popular and used all over the world about 25 years ago, okay? The digital turn in leisure studies started about, I'm generalizing here, about 5 years ago. There were some people looking at online activities, but it was not that intense. So while we were still focusing on traditional offline leisure, other disciplines were studying technology and leisure. It was in many social sciences like communication studies, sociology, psychology, education, social work, nursing, engineering as well. But the leisure people were not there, and they didn't have much impact and contribution to the growing body of knowledge about leisure and technology. Now we do witness a change in the past 5 years, I would say. But I would say that we don't contribute much now to the literature. We kind of complete missing pieces, but we were late to the party. And there's another party, a very exciting party that is starting now. And my message to the people here, I don't know who's here, is that we have an opportunity to make an impact, okay, if we join that party now. And that party has to do with the future, okay? The internet and all ICTs are now considered old media, okay? Let's think about the media that are going to enter our lives in the next couple of decades. And these media are virtual realities, augmented reality, AI, and more than anything else, robotics technologies. The robotics of today are like the internet of the 90s. They are slow, they make mistakes. Everything that you remember, if you're old enough from the 90s, is what we see now with robotics. But if we join the research on robotics and other advanced technologies now, we have an opportunity to bring our knowledge and understanding of leisure and have an effect on the design and the programming of such technologies, and in that way we may have an impact on leisure experiences in the future. Okay, so my message to all of us here is think about the future. Okay, ICT is great. There's still enough things to learn about online gaming and online communities and so forth, but we should think about the next technologies and how we can have an impact in their design. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation to a party. You should never refuse an invitation to a party, I understand. Carrie, do you want to share thoughts on the question is, again, forward-thinking research opportunities in the technology realm?
I've definitely been thinking the same thing, you know, that we need the leisure professionals, the leisure industry. We understand the human dimension of what we're calling technology, you know, virtual reality, robotics. And we really need to make sure we have a place at the table in the development. So definitely working with other disciplines, engineers, the software companies. So yeah, we need to make sure we join the party. Someone was asking about my virtual reality sailing simulator, and that's another thing to think about as far as working with other countries and not just thinking of the Western perspective like you're bringing up, Stephen. So we're a part of an international consortium, and I would say it brings so much more richness to how we think about what we're doing just with our virtual reality. So we work with people from other researchers from Australia and the UK and Poland and Japan and Spain. Yes, maybe mainly other European countries, but it's a start. And so there is, the engineering part of it. They are very involved in what we're doing, but we also have the people studying the people, the leisure experiences that are involved in our consortium. And it's a great partnership. But, we need to keep thinking about the importance of access, the costs, the, other areas like that. But we need to make sure we're at the table and part of the party, like Galit's saying.
Thank you so much. Okay. And thoughts and perspectives on future research, Stefan?
I had a couple of things really that I wanted to put forth. I think, sorry, I'm getting over the super cold that's doing the rounds at the moment because of everyone's kind of immunities not there. So apologies. I think there's a couple of things really. I think one, theoretically and conceptually, that we need to develop new vehicles through which to think critically about the place of leisure and the changing forms of leisure, and what that ultimately means for our relationship with broader economic and social inequalities. What is the fundamental point of leisure studies? Is it to be at the table to wheel the cogs of tech companies that are going to realize billions of dollars from our labor and from our knowledge? Or is it to hold these particular companies to account through our work and through our scholarship? So I think that's something that has to be thought more, thought at perhaps a little bit more clearly in terms of when we're doing this, whose agendas are we serving? I think, therefore, the burgeoning work on claustropolitan sociology from a sociological point of view, taking the taking the effects, the social and cultural implications of foreclosure, particularly algorithmical foreclosure, the ways in which algorithms are feeding back to us our own biases, but also the structures of the internet themselves, that they aren't benign and they are programmable. AI very much depends on the kind of information that we input into the system, so machine learning, and asking more fundamental questions about that, because much of our leisure time is spent online. And that's incredibly important for us to move, particularly those of us that are interested in race and ethnicity, that are moving simply past the kind of racist trolling that happens online. What do we do about policing anonymous individuals? That we're actually asking more deeper fundamental questions about the racialization of the internet. Jesse Daniels' work is really interesting, to really start to consider about the kind of structures and places that we're putting, things that we're putting in place. And the last thing really, I think, from me on agendas moving forward is really the Internet of Things, and the which I think perhaps speaks to what Galip was saying about something about robotics. It's about the place of hardware and the invasion really of these kind of, as I said before, Apple Watches, Amazon Alexas into our homes, inviting them into our homes, and seeing how they can either enhance or surveil our leisure lives and our leisure experiences. So yeah, I guess to sum up really, theoretically and conceptually, we need to move with the mainstream. We need to find new theoretical and conceptual vehicles that aren't simply Bourdieu or Foucault, or that we need to move beyond those, or depart from, perhaps. I guess that's where what I think would be important.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nimrod, do you want to respond to these ideas regarding the surveillance and what role leisure people would play at the table?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that I have the answer for that. We're definitely going into a world of surveillance, and we're already there. We're being monitored all the time. Our cell phones are trackable. What we do online can be restored even if we delete the history. Okay, so I think that I'm not sure what our role can be as leisure scholars related to that. That's a good opportunity for research, for future research. I really don't know. That's a good, maybe we can hear the audience, maybe they have ideas.
Sure. Carrie, perspective?
I don't have an answer, but I just have an interjection of how that is affecting child development and youth development, of everything that's going on with the bullying and so increase in suicides and things like that. So I'm kind of I'm putting that in there too, with the new theoretical frameworks that you're.
I'm really happy to jump off the fence. I think it's really important that we are critical and we do hold, and that is a long tradition of leisure studies being critical of corporate interest and commercial interest. So I wasn't meaning to be neutral and sit on the fence. So I'm quite happy to come off the fence on that.
Sure. I'm curious.
Maybe one possible influence would be on the experience of leisure. We do look at experiences, and if people are aware that they're being monitored and all the time, they may not be experience as much freedom as they're supposed to experience in leisure. So that's one effect that we may witness with time. I don't think most people are now thinking about it while they're at leisure. They just enjoy the experience. But probably social media users do. they are aware that everything they write, everything they comment, everything that they post is there and can be trackable and can be used in different ways. So I think that freedom is an important component of leisure may be harmed, and that's something we should all think about.
Thank you. Yes, there's a comment in the chat about the integration of technology, and does that reduce the whole experience of leisure? Absolutely. I was going to ask about, how do we get that party invitation? Because I feel like the robotics people have their minds set about what they need and want to do, and have big grant goals, and where and how is leisure relevant for their worlds? And I think that's more of a collaborative, cooperative question. Have you had success with that, or ideas for that?
I was going to say that there was a particular company I shouldn't name that was interested in sensual experience and introducing a third sense through a particular piece of hardware that's attached to the body. And it's, I haven't tried it itself, but it's supposed to orientate itself towards true north. And therefore it's supposed to enhance our, introduce really a sense that animals have quite naturally. It's to enhance our senses. And, how then that is used if you were to eat I think the example that was given, if you were to eat a piece of steak, you could sense where that particular animal came from. Apologies to vegans, but I'm just using the example that was given to me. And they were particularly interested actually in its application in the sporting. This is why they approached me. They were particularly interested in how that kind of tech would be used in a sporting sense, because spatiality and understanding of space, and those of us who are familiar with sports, we're familiar with the phrases of the telepathic understanding between, a particular athlete and another is really, really important. And having that kind of sense of direction and kind of the sense of spatiality is something that they were particularly interested in philosophically in terms of this development. So I think that there are points of synergy. And I was particularly interested to work with this particular person because their overall goals and aims seem to be towards social justice and the application of this technology to those things. So I think there is space for reaching out and working, but I guess it's for the individual researchers to think about their own agendas and whether they align with those of the people that they're with. So I think that people are interested in talking to us. But it's about reaching out and asking. And I think sometimes, in leisure studies that we can be a little bit reticent to reach out, because I think that sometimes as a discipline, we might feel somewhat less confident. But I think actually there is a space that when we reach out to these people, that they are quite receptive to what we have to say, even if it's just for an initial meeting.
I wanted to.
I agree. Gary? I absolutely agree with Stephen. They are reaching out for us in all the calls for applications in the recent years. Interdisciplinary team is very important, and it became a key for success in getting grants. So I had experience with engineers approaching me. I became their token social scientist in their applications. And sometimes, it works and you get the grant. So, you can wait for them to reach you and reach out for you, but you can also start, writing people, especially in your own universities. You can form an informal relationship. You can go to their seminars, you can ask questions, and then they'll start realizing that you do have something to say and to contribute to what they're doing. And especially if you're critical in your questions and your comments, they will understand that they need you. So yeah, definitely, this is something that we should do, and the sooner the better, I would say.
Thank you. And thank you. We have a link to a film about the importance of collaboration between IT and social sciences in the chat. Fantastic. We did also have a question related to discussion in the rural areas about technology and integration, indicating that perhaps our conversation's been a little bit more urban or metro focused. Perspectives, comments on that? I believe you can see the question.
I mean, I'm happy to try if anyone hasn't got anything burning to say. I mean, I don't necessarily see the distinction between urban and rural as being a problematic one. I think that speaks to broader access issues to particularly to the internet and to Wi-Fi. I think sort of digital technologies in terms of the way in which that they can enhance our experiences of outdoor space, and also actually the opportunities for technology to create a more ecological and environmental world. I mean, I know that there's a number of innovative sort of COP26 at the moment, which is happening in the UK. And we can talk about whether those strategies to deal with the climate crisis are successful or not. I think it's a slightly different discussion, but nonetheless, I think really engaging more with the ecological environmental aspects of leisure is one that is underrepresented, and one that perhaps as a field we need to engage with a little bit more. I think perhaps the silence on that speaks to my own deficiency in taking time to think about more deeply about that particular application. But the way in which I think we construct environments and stadia, and how those environments can interact with us as a leisure population, and I mean, we've seen a football club here, Forest Green Rovers, that are planning on building the most ecologically sustainable football stadium in the world. So it's about integrating the rural into the urban, as opposed to thinking about how we keep those two dichotomies existent. How do we use sustainable materials? How do they then factor into digital ecosystems? And then how we can start to record the data that are produced from these projects, so that we can replicate them across the world. Because I think that's what we see, really, isn't it, in the West of civilizations moving forward, that the developing world seems to learn from the mistakes of the major industrial nations and try to put some of those things right. So it's about collecting that data that we use in urban spaces as well as in rural spaces, trying to make that connection between the two spaces more knowable, and ultimately more ecological, more environmental.
Thank you. Other perspectives on that?
I just I have a very specific example, and it's local. I would say it's a case study of what we're doing here. We're in a very rural area, and the technology, the virtual reality, the adapted boat has really opened up an access to the people with disabilities in this community of thinking about something that they can do that they never thought that they could do. So you can think of other different activities and sports. And so some of the things that we've been able to address is that the benefit of using technology from the lab to reality, and the boat is very, technology based as well. But it involved the community. So there was some really community development aspects of it, and some educational aspects of it, of helping others learn about people with disabilities and what what is important, and then to be able to access our services. And all that was, brought about through the use of technology. And then being outdoors, there's an important aspect of connectedness to nature for people with disabilities, because there's definitely barriers to that. So there's all kinds of things that we can think about as far as how we adapt, how we make space accessible, and then into the virtual reality side of things. If people are isolated in their homes, older adults, how can they access, such experiences that might bring enjoyment? For example, at end of life, if they're in hospice, so from being young to old. And I think it really crosses over between a lot of our disciplines, from, outdoor natural resources, sport, tourism, events, disability.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. We don't really have anyone here representing tourism so much, but definitely VR and AR has been used. A little bit I know about it, for example, to see if and how a VR experience influences intentions to visit a destination. And to the question about sustainable use of natural resources, can these VR experiences serve as a substitute to simultaneously protect those very specific places, but provide, something that is really meaningful and similarly beneficial without that travel or other issues that might be related to that?
I think there's a strong educational aspect of that too. And my colleague here, Jeffrey Skibbins, is doing a lot with that, with conservation psychology, and he's getting into some of the virtual reality aspects of that, and the emotional connectedness to parks and zoos, and visit for visitors. But it's educational too.
Absolutely. There's some huge research, right, in VR and education.
I
Sounds
want
like
to
maybe we
add
have
to
someone
Carrie's
Oh.
note. I want to add to Carrie's note about the benefits of technology use in rural areas. In the studies of digital divides, we actually have 3 levels of digital divides. One is the divide of access, and rural areas used to be behind urban areas in terms of access. But nowadays, let's say in most Western world, okay, let's limit our discussion to Western world, most rural areas are connected to the internet. But then we have the second level, and that's the level of skills and knowledge and knowing how to make the most of technology. And here there are so many studies demonstrating differences between people in rural areas and people in urban areas, and in favor of people in urban areas. It has to do with education, of course, not just access. But here comes the paradox in terms of benefits. Okay, and that's the third level of digital divide. People in rural areas may benefit from ICT use more than people in urban areas, because it can, to an extent, compensate for fewer leisure opportunities in their areas. Okay, it can be studies, it can be volunteering, it can be anything, cultural events and things that are available online and are not available where they live. So maybe as a field, especially practitioners, should think about that in programming for people in rural areas, and add a component of digital literacy, okay, and trainings for people in these areas to promote, on one hand, their skills, but then it will definitely benefit them in terms of their leisure experiences. So that just a thought about that.
Thank you for sharing. Terrific. I have a question about participating, kind of a double-decker participation as I view it, Stefan, in sport. So I'm in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, where our pro football team is building an esports stadium, which they are expecting significant visitation to. So people will come here to watch people play esports. I wondered if you wanted to comment on that, and anyone wants to comment on that, but
Well, the Colts, right? Indianapolis Colts.
Vikings, but it's okay.
Oh,
I mean, Minneapolis Vikings.
Minneapolis.
There are the
I thought you
Indianapolis
said-
Colts.
I thought you said Indianapolis. Sorry, it's the connection here. No, but with regards to esports as a phenomena, of course, I'm sure that everybody knows the exponential growth, and there's been degree courses over here in the UK that have been developed, and I would imagine that would have been similar innovations in the United States. But we're seeing Wolverhampton Wanderers, who is a professional football club, not the Minnesota Vikings, have taken on very similar strategies that you're starting to see professional football clubs or professional soccer teams starting to introduce their own esports teams, if you like. There's not been any significant investment structurally in terms of stadia, which is perhaps something that we might see in the UK, but of course we always take our lead from sport management from the UK, usually from the United States. So I don't think it'll be too far behind. And we're starting to see, the local club Wolverhampton Wanderers, where the very real traditional sort of logos and badges from the 1800s now being superimposed onto the virtual uniforms of players that are playing a host of different video games that have absolutely nothing to do with football. This is a real growth space, and I think absolutely probably speaks, Ingrid, actually to one of the growth areas that would be useful for further study, to take this particular phenomenon seriously, to understand its growth and its development, but also actually to really start to think about the mental health implications that the professionalization and commercialization of this particular space has for the young people, very young people in many ways, that are professional athletes in these spaces. That's something that is not given as much attention, particularly research attention to. Some of those particular pressures of living in a single house and going through this kind of training. And it really flips the traditional notion of jock culture on its head. You know, the kind of people that are the stars of this particular space look very, very different to the kind of athletes that you would see in college sports or in pro sports, and how the cultures in those spaces are very different, and the kind of people and the psychology of those particular people in those spaces. So it opens up a completely new cultural arena in which we really know very little about how some of these particular structures and some of these social norms are playing out and what the long-term effects are. Just as we're seeing in the NFL and in rugby, and also in football in this country, a host of historical injuries that develop over time in terms of concussions, dementia, etc., etc. What is the long-term impact of spending so much time glued to a screen? I'm not sure that we know that just yet, and that erring on the side of caution really might be something that would be interesting. So these big, huge commercial investments in stadia development, what are the implications of which will be interesting from a research agenda for leisure studies? Absolutely, speaks to making it relevant as well.
Thanks for sharing. I also have a question for Carrie, actually, and everyone, but I recently delved a little bit into VR research and was surprised at the high percentage of people who claimed motion sickness or cyber sickness. And so that's a constraint. Initially I was all gung ho, and now I'm like, I don't know about this, both in terms of offering it as programming and particularly among women. There appears to be greater sickness. So anyone want to speak to that or experience, or are we getting better with the technology that'll go away?
It's definitely a concern. I hear that question a lot of, the physical aspects of motion sickness. I think it would be, it's another area to definitely think about. I mean, as part of our, assessment of, do you get motion sickness? So of learning about what affects people before they even are doing it. So, because you want a pleasurable experience, right? You still want them to enjoy what they're doing. And motion sickness is not pleasurable. But that's a great.
This is an opportunity for you, Ingrid. This is a leisure constraint. We're talking about future opportunities in terms of research, and everybody who's interested in leisure constraints, there you go.
Well, that was not my intention. I was, but yes, you're right. But I was just like, it really, had me rethink, this virtual century, and who will we exclude from that, because of this, or how quickly will the technology catch up, and
I think one of the things perhaps is prudent to mention here is my research in terms of the digitalization of football cultures has resulted in a stark increase in participation of female fans, predominantly in the and I think we're seeing an increase in female fandom across digital spaces, which again fundamentally challenges our understandings of the way in which sport and leisure are structured by gender. And of course, what's really interesting about esports, it entirely takes away the debates that are commonly used by, quite frankly, sexist traditionalists, that men and women aren't embodied somatically to be able to compete with one another. With something like esports, of course, that takes away the embodied dimension, but we're still seeing the reproduction of male hegemony in those spaces. And what is happening, I think, broadly speaking, across the video game industry more broadly, that there has been a number of attempts in a number of games that have been released to try to program in a really strong female protagonist, and then what are those particular attempts, or the backlash really at those attempts to do that, and what does that reflect back to us about actually the material reality? I think that's one of the things perhaps I'm really keen to emphasize, that I don't think necessarily that this debate needs to be within a digital or kind of lived material within a dichotomy. These two things are always interlinked. That what happens online, of course, has material effects within our real world, and sometimes I think we need to pay close attention to that.
I just wanted to add one more aspect, that technology can, and this is in sport, recreation, technology can really help decrease the divide when we talk about ableism. So when you were talking about gender related issues, but with people with disabilities, it opens up a leveling field that's the same for everybody, and participation is not divided. So I think in the future, is that going to have effect on Paralympics and Olympics? That divide. So if there's more opportunities to be on the same leveling field through the use of technology.
Well, I am just so delighted with this conversation and grateful for each of you. What a robust, diverse perspectives. I'm happy we were all here and able to contribute. It sounds like we've got at least one more panel, at least, Gayla mentioned, for research methodologies that we can just go into. So we've got a listing for next year. And certainly if you've got additional questions, you could pop them in the chat and our speakers might be able to share their responses later. But really, thank you so much for taking the time and energy to craft these responses, speak on your feet, and enlighten us about the status of technology and really interesting opportunities. I might be tapping a couple of you for some sabbatical requests. And I will let our fearless leader close us out.
Just kind of repeat what Ingrid already mentioned. I'm very impressed with this panel today, and thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise. Thank you for super engaged audience today. We do appreciate this opportunity to really bring people together from different parts of the world. And this is our major kind of goal here, to allow us to have this very international and sometimes even interdisciplinary discussion. So we really do appreciate everybody's engagement, and thank you, Ingrid, for leading such a live and vibrant discussion. As I said, I posted in the chat, there's information that can be found about our upcoming webinars and past webinars, and the link to this recording will be sent to you through the Zoom system. So thank you all again, and hope everybody enjoys their weekend, and thank you again for discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to the hosts. You did a sterling job. Thank you for inviting us to talk.
So fun. Just really had a great time. I'm super excited. So many places I want to come visit now and see what's happening.
Thank you so much, and apologies again. I don't know how it happened.
Glad you're okay. Yeah, I actually have to scoot. So we'll talk later. Everyone be well. Take care. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Ciao.
Is that time difference?
What's that?
The time difference is always,
I know.
I always get confused.
That's my always concern about, because we are connecting with people from so many different places. It's just
true.
always, and like we always ask to double check because we miscalculate sometimes. So somewhere mistake do happen sometimes. But thank you again one more time, Karen. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Appreciate
Have
it.
a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.